The shattered ruins of Xiphos 7 loomed before Elias Voss like the bones of a long-dead titan, jagged and silent beneath the pale light of the system's dying sun. The wind howled through the crumbling city, carrying the scent of scorched metal and decay. Somewhere in this graveyard of war, a legend still breathed. A monster. A ghost. The last Draxir warlord. Elias adjusted the strap of his pack, feeling the weight of the task ahead. He was alone, by choice. A strike team had been offered, but that would have guaranteed failure. Karax didn't trust anyone, least of all humans. If this had any chance of working, it had to be one-on-one. No weapons. No tricks. A faint tremor passed through the ground beneath his boots. Not the wind. Something heavier. Something moving. His pulse remained steady, but his muscles tensed. The report said Karax was a myth, a specter lurking in the ruins, striking down those foolish enough to seek him out. Elias stepped deeper into the city's remains, past the rusting skeletons of war machines and the hollowed-out remnants of alien architecture. He scanned the shadows between the broken pillars and twisted metal. He knew he was being watched. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a guttural snarl that sent a primal shiver down his spine. "I smell your fear, human." Elias halted. The ruins swallowed all sound, yet he could hear the slow, deliberate footsteps circling him. He turned his head slightly, scanning his periphery. "I don't fear you," he said evenly. A low, rumbling laugh. A shape moved in the darkness, too fast for its size. Then, from the shadows he emerged. Karax was enormous. Over 7 feet of battle-scarred muscle, his armor cracked and worn but still exuding menace. His emerald eyes glowed beneath a crested helm that had seen 1,000 wars. Clawed fingers flexed at his sides, and his massive shoulders rose and fell with slow, measured breaths. "Then you are a fool," Karax growled. Elias held his ground. He had faced warlords before, human, alien, and everything in between. None carried the presence of this one. There was something primal about the way Karax stood, like a predator deciding whether to strike. "I didn't come to fight," Elias said. "I came to talk." Karax tilted his head slightly, as if considering. "Words," he muttered. "Your kind uses them like weapons. Twisting. Deceiving." He took a slow step forward, the ground cracking beneath his weight. "I prefer steel." Elias inhaled deeply. He had expected this. "Steel is easy. Talking is harder." Karax's eyes narrowed. He took another step closer. "I could kill you where you stand." "You could," Elias admitted. "But you won't." A flicker of something crossed Karax's face. Amusement? Annoyance? The warlord was used to fear. He was used to screams, to begging. This was different. Karax's fingers twitched toward the hilt of a blade strapped to his back. "Give me one reason," he rumbled. "Why I shouldn't tear you apart." Elias met his gaze without flinching. "Because you're tired of killing." Silence. A slow exhale from the warlord, more growl than breath. "You assume much." "I assume nothing," Elias countered. "I know warriors. Real ones. Not the cowards who fight for money or the fanatics who die for empty causes. The true ones, the ones like you, fight because they have to. Not because they want to." Karax's gaze darkened. "You speak as if you understand." "I do," Elias said. "I fought in the Zalari wars. I saw what was done to your people." The warlord's jaw clenched. The very mention of it was a challenge, a wound barely scabbed over. "Your kind slaughtered us," Karax snarled. "My kind?" Elias's voice was steady, but there was an edge beneath it. "I was there when the Dominion glassed the Draxir homeworld. I saw their warships burn your cities, butcher your families. That wasn't us. That was them." Karax's muscles tensed, but he didn't speak. Elias took a step forward, not a challenge, but deliberate. "I'm not here to make excuses. I came because the war isn't over. The Zalari Dominion is fractured, but they're not finished. They're coming for this planet. They're coming for you. A long pause. The wind howled through the ruins. And you think I need your help? Karax finally said, his voice quieter, deadlier. I think, Elias said carefully, that a warrior like you deserves more than to die alone in a graveyard. Another long silence. Karax's fingers flexed again, claws scraping against his armor. His breathing was slow, controlled. Interesting, he said at last. Then, without warning, he moved. A blur of motion, faster than anything that size had any right to be. 1 second, Karax was a few feet away. The next, Elias was airborne, his body slamming against the crumbling wall behind him. Pain exploded across his back, but he forced himself to remain still. Karax loomed over him, one massive clawed hand pinning him against the stone. The warlord's breath was hot against his face. If you think words will earn my trust, Karax said, you are a greater fool than I thought. Elias exhaled slowly, keeping his voice even. Then tell me what will. For the first time, Karax hesitated. Elias held his gaze. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to see that we have the same enemy. You can kill me now, or you can hear me out. Either way, I'll die on my feet. Karax studied him for a long moment, eyes searching, measuring. Then, slowly, he stepped back, releasing Elias from his grip. You will prove yourself, Karax said. Not with words. With action. Elias straightened, rolling his shoulders to ease the ache. Name it. Karax's lips curled into something between a sneer and a smirk. Survive the trials. Then we will talk. Elias nodded once. Fine. The warlord turned without another word, striding deeper into the ruins. Elias took a breath and followed. The ruins stretched before Elias like a labyrinth of broken stone and rusted steel, a battlefield long since abandoned but still echoing with its ghosts. Karax moved ahead, his massive frame casting long shadows against the jagged walls. He hadn't spoken since issuing the challenge, but Elias could feel the weight of his presence like an unsheathed blade. They stopped at the edge of a collapsed structure, a jagged chasm splitting the earth where some ancient bombardment had torn through. Karax turned, his emerald eyes unreadable. You seek words. I require action. He gestured to the crumbling remains of what had once been a towering fortress. 3 trials. Survive them, and we will speak as warriors. Fail, and you die. Elias exhaled slowly. Let's get on with it. Karax's tusked grin was anything but friendly. Then bleed for your words. The first trial began without warning. A sudden, guttural roar split the air, and Elias pivoted just as a blur of movement exploded from the rubble. A beast, low-slung and sinewy, all muscle and hunger. Its 4 powerful limbs propelled it forward, jaws snapping with rows of serrated teeth. Elias dodged, barely avoiding the creature's strike as it slammed into the ground where he had stood a second earlier. Dust and stone flew, and before he could recover, the beast coiled for another lunge. No weapons. No armor. Just instinct and experience. Elias feinted left, forcing the creature to adjust mid-strike. He twisted, sidestepping its charge, then grabbed a chunk of debris and drove it into the creature's eye. The impact sent it reeling, shrieking in pain, but it wasn't dead. He needed an opening. The beast recovered fast, its single good eye locking onto him, rage bleeding from every twitch of its frame. It pounced again, but this time Elias met it head-on. He shifted his weight at the last second, grabbing hold of its forelimb as it struck. Using its own momentum, he redirected the force, sending the creature crashing into a rusted column. The steel impaled its throat. A final gurgling snarl. Then stillness. Karax watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once. You live. The first test is complete. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow. What's next? The warlord turned, leading him deeper into the ruins. The air grew colder, the skeletal remains of once great buildings pressing in on all sides. They stopped before a narrow passage where a faint sound echoed, a voice. Weak. Desperate. Karax's gaze remained fixed on Elias. The second trial is a test of honor. Within, you will find an innocent trapped between life and death. To free them is to risk yourself. His voice was low, almost mocking. You claim to understand warriors. Now prove it. Elias clenched his jaw and stepped forward. The space was tight, forcing him to move carefully through the wreckage. The voice grew clearer, a child's cry, though not human. His pulse quickened. He found her wedged beneath a collapsed support beam, her reptilian features streaked with blood and dust. The Xiphosian girl, barely more than 10, whimpered as she struggled to move. Elias crouched beside her. "Hey, I've got you," he murmured. "Stay still." He braced himself and pushed against the debris. The weight resisted, but he ground his teeth and heaved. The beam shifted an inch, then another. A groan from above, the structure was unstable. If he lifted it fully, there was a chance the entire section would come down. A chance. Not a certainty. Elias adjusted his grip and pushed. The beam gave way, toppling to the side just as part of the ceiling caved in. He threw himself over the girl, shielding her as debris rained down. The dust settled. Elias coughed, blinking away the grit in his eyes. The girl was safe. He helped her to her feet, and she clung to his arm, her large eyes filled with a mix of fear and gratitude. Karax was waiting as Elias emerged with the child. The warlord studied him, then the girl. His expression betrayed nothing. "Many warriors would have left her." Elias met his gaze. "Then they're not warriors. They're cowards." A pause. A slow exhale. Then Karax did something unexpected. He knelt. The girl hesitated, but when the warlord extended a clawed hand, she placed her tiny fingers against his palm. A warrior's gesture. He nodded once, then rose. "She will return to her people." His voice was quiet. "You pass." Elias didn't respond. He was already bracing for the third trial. They walked in silence until they reached an open space, the last remnants of an ancient battleground. The stone beneath their feet was scorched black, the remains of a war long past. Karax drew the massive blade from his back, its edge worn but still deadly. He planted it into the ground between them. "The final trial is trust," he said. "You will take up that weapon. You will fight me." His emerald eyes locked onto Elias's. "And you will decide whether you strike to kill." Elias glanced at the blade. His fingers twitched, itching to take it. To fight. But that wasn't the test. He met Karax's gaze and reached out, gripping the weapon by the hilt. It was heavier than expected, humming with a weight beyond steel. He lifted it, feeling its balance. Karax took a step back, arms at his sides. He wasn't guarding himself. He wasn't preparing to counter. He was waiting. Elias tightened his grip. He could strike. He could end this. But that wasn't why he came. With a steady breath, he released the weapon. Let it fall. The clang echoed through the ruins like a hammer striking bone. Silence stretched. Karax's gaze bore into him, unreadable. Then, slowly, the warlord nodded. "You understand." Elias met his eyes. "I meant what I said. I'm not here to fight you." Karax exhaled, a deep sound like distant thunder. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. This time, Elias followed as an equal. The wind howled through the ruins as Elias followed Karax deeper into the broken city, the silence between them heavier than stone. There was no longer a need for words. He had proven himself. The path wound through the shattered remnants of war, twisted beams, scorched walls, the skeletal remains of long-forgotten battles. Despite the destruction, something about this place felt alive, as if the past still whispered through the rubble. Karax moved with the quiet certainty of someone who belonged here, his massive frame casting long shadows beneath the pale sky. At last, they reached a structure that had fared better than the rest. Thick pillars stood defiantly, and though the walls bore the scars of war, they remained upright. Karax pushed open a rusted door, revealing a chamber lit by the faint glow of ancient energy conduits. Elias stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Weapons lined the walls, blades, rifles, armor. Relics of a fallen empire. At the far end, a massive stone table dominated the space, its surface engraved with symbols Elias didn't recognize. Karax moved toward it, running a clawed hand across the carvings. "This was once the heart of my people," the warlord said at last. "The council chamber of the Draxir." His voice held something different now, not just strength, but memory. "Loss." Elias stepped closer. "And now?" Karax's jaw tightened. "Now it is a tomb." The warlord turned, his eyes locking onto Elias. "Tell me why you are truly here." Elias didn't hesitate. "The Zalari Dominion is regaining power. If they aren't stopped, they'll finish what they started. Planets will burn. Not just yours, mine too. We don't have the numbers to stop them alone." Karax studied him. "And you think I can change that?" "I know you can." Elias gestured to the chamber around them. "You're not just a warrior, Karax. You were a leader. Your people followed you once. They would again." The warlord exhaled sharply, something between a scoff and a sigh. "You assume there are any left to follow." Elias crossed his arms. "I don't assume. I know." Karax's eyes narrowed. "There are Draxir survivors," Elias continued. "Scattered. Hiding. They believe they have no future, that their war is lost." He held Karax's gaze. "But if they knew their warlord still stood, still fought." He let the thought hang between them. Karax remained silent for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke. "Even if they live, gathering them would be impossible." Elias shook his head. "Not impossible. Difficult, maybe. But I've spent years tracking Dominion movements. I know where they took prisoners, where survivors fled. I have names. Coordinates." Karax's claws flexed, his jaw tightening. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his gaze. Not fear. Something deeper. "They will not trust so easily," he muttered. Elias stepped forward. "Then give them something to believe in." The warlord turned away, staring at the ancient engravings on the stone table. The silence stretched, but Elias didn't press. He could feel the weight of the decision, the battle happening within Karax. Minutes passed before the warlord finally spoke. "You asked me to raise a broken people," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "To fight a war we already lost." Elias met his gaze. "No. I'm asking you to show them they're not dead yet." Another long pause. Then, Karax let out a slow breath. "If we do this," he said, "we do it my way." Elias nodded. "Of course." The warlord's tusked mouth curled slightly. "Then we begin at dawn." It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was enough. The night was restless. Elias sat near the fire, watching the embers dance while Karax stood at the edge of the ruins, staring into the distance. The warlord hadn't spoken much since agreeing to fight, but something in his posture had changed. He no longer looked like a relic of a forgotten war. He looked like a warrior ready for battle. Elias didn't need sleep. His mind was too sharp, too alive with possibilities. He had spent years searching for someone like Karax, someone who could turn the tide. Now, he had him. But gathering survivors was only the first step. They needed a victory, something to prove to the scattered Draxir that their war wasn't over. Karax turned suddenly. "Come," he said. Elias stood without hesitation, following as the warlord led him toward a crumbling tower. Inside, the air was thick with dust, but in the center stood something untouched by time, a holographic projector. Karax activated it, and a map flickered to life, its ancient symbols marking locations Elias didn't recognize. "These are the last known strongholds of my people," Karax said. "Some were destroyed, others abandoned. But one remains." He pointed to a spot far to the north. "The Black Spire." Elias studied the projection. "You think survivors are there?" Karax nodded. "If they live, they will be there." Elias didn't ask how he knew. He had learned that Karax's instincts were as sharp as any blade. We leave at first light, the warlord said. They traveled in silence. The landscape shifted from ruined cities to jagged cliffs and barren wastelands. Time had not been kind to this world, but Karax moved through it as if he could still see it as it once was. Elias kept pace, scanning the horizon. The further they went, the heavier the air became, thick with the scent of old battlefields. By midday, they reached the outskirts of the Black Spire. The fortress stood like a wound against the sky, its towering form weathered but unbroken. Smoke curled from vents along its base, signs of life. They are still here, Karax murmured. Elias checked his weapon. How do we approach? Karax didn't hesitate. We walk in. Elias gave him a look. That simple? Karax's tusked mouth curled slightly. They will either welcome me or try to kill me. Either way, we will know where they stand. Elias exhaled. All right, let's hope they're in a welcoming mood. They moved forward, stepping onto the ancient bridge that led to the entrance. The moment their boots touched the stone, figures emerged from the shadows, Draxxir warriors, their weapons raised, eyes burning with suspicion. One stepped forward, his scarred face twisting in recognition. Impossible. Karax held his ground. You know me. The warrior hesitated. Karax is dead. The warlord's voice was steady. Then tell me, warrior, who stands before you now? The Draxxir shifted uneasily. Whispers spread among them. Then, from the fortress doors, another figure emerged. A female, her posture rigid with authority. She studied Karax with cold, measuring eyes. You return after all these years, she said. Why? Karax stepped forward. To end what was started. A long silence stretched between them. Then she nodded. Then you are not too late. The doors opened, and the Draxxir warriors stepped aside. Elias followed as Karax walked into the stronghold, not as an exile, but as a leader once more.